Hi, I'm Jan Scholes from the Real Asset Company. Today I have with me Detlev Schlichter, author of Paper Money Collapse. Today we're just going to have a quick talk about Austrian economics. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much, Jan.
I really enjoyed your book, and I think it's a great introduction for people to Austrian economics. And it's also good for people that are already Austrian economists and libertarians. Do you think that the Keynesianism, which is how our monetary system is now based on, is now threatened by Austrian economics because we're seeing this kind of the death of fiat money?
I like to think so. I have to say that there are two different developments here. One is the world of academia, which I think is firmly in the hands still of Keynesians and partially monetarists in some other schools, but I would say Keynesians, neo-Keynesians are still dominating large parts of academia. And it's interesting. I recently visited for my book tour, some of the Eastern European countries, and it's interesting that there you do find Austrian School economists in some of the universities. So I think in the world of academia, I think the established Keynesianism has still a stronghold. But I do think that economics is in crisis. We don't only have a financial and economic crisis right now. We also have an intellectual crisis in economics, because I think the problems we have today are the result of wrong theories, of I think inappropriate and flawed views on our economies and how they operate. And frankly, I think the development in macroeconomics over the last 70 years has played a very strong role in getting us into this mess. After the Second World War, we've basically institutionalized inflationism. We created a global set of institutions that were based on the idea that constant monetary debasement is good for the economy. There were clearly, Keynesian ideas in this. So John Maynard Keynes himself led the discussions of Bretton Woods. And obviously the system then took another step further in 1971, when Bretton Woods was abandoned and the gold window was closed by Richard Nixon. And since 1971 we have an entire fiat money system. So I think these ideas have shaped our financial infrastructure. And I think most people don't realize that it was sort of intellectual ideas which then led to political decisions, which implemented our present system. The present system is not the outcome of spontaneous market forces or some evolution of capitalism. It is the result of academic ideas and then political decisions, and I think these decisions are wrong. So as we go into this crisis, I do think more and more people will question these theories, and they will open their minds to other ideas, and I think that is a chance for the Austrian school.
And what do you say to people that would, I saw you talk many months ago in Parliament, and someone stood up and said, but the reason that Keynesianism is working so well is because that's what the people want, that's what they require. And how would you respond to that?
I think that's another area sort of where the institutions we have created and the ideas that have been spread sort of are mixed also now with our ideas sort of how a democratic government should work and what the state should do, what the state's role is in the government and in the economy and in financial markets. It's true. Obviously, today I would say a large part of the public has the expectation that we can have a better economy, a better growing economy, a more stable economy, a more just economy, and higher income and stability and security and all these things, because the government manages capitalism. And economists have come up with all these clever ideas with central banks and printing money and stimulate the economy with interest rates and all these things to make this economy more stable, more secure, and we all benefit. And this is sort of the idea that has spread, and I think this is an idea that now assigns to the state and active monetary and economic policy a very, very large role, something that we've, I think, never seen before in history in our societies. But again, I come back to the point, I do think that these ideas are wrong. We have to look at them as economists and say, does this work? Can we really generate prosperity by constantly debasing money, which we're doing today, and this is what we're trying. And whenever the economy turns down, we just print a bit more money and print it faster and lower interest rates a bit further to again create sort of this another short-lived artificial boom. Is this the way to really raise living standards and create lasting wealth and lasting prosperity? As an economist, you have to say no. And I think it should be our role as economists to educate the public and tell people how the economy really works and what really generates wealth and prosperity. It's not printing money. Therefore, I think to not look at these problems and to not look at them rationally and sort of in the clear light of the day, because you think the current democratic majority will not accept these ideas. Often when I say we will ultimately go back to a gold standard, people tell me the public will never stand for this. Nobody will vote for this. Well, we have to see. I do think as this system integrates and collapses in front of our very eyes, I do think that people will actually learn much faster than many people give them credit for, and I do think the public will realize much quicker what works and what doesn't work. So I think it will. I don't expect a political party to come up tomorrow and put this on their manifesto. But I do think as the crisis deepens, as more people ask questions, people will see what the problems are, what the solutions are. And in the midst of the crisis, then I think better alternatives will become politically feasible.
Yeah, I agree, because I think at the moment people are in this kind of limbo. They're sort of hoping that the government are going to sort it out, because they always have done in the past, apparently, and they'll always kind of, I think they're hoping for the answers just going to be put on the plate for them.
I do think, and I think honestly, I think that's one of the big problems of our time. I mean, there is a crazy belief in politics and what the state can do, and it's almost comical now if you read the press about the debates and about the problems with Greece and the monetary union in Europe. I mean, practically most of these governments are bankrupt. I mean, they're all borrowing money, and they only pay their bills by borrowing more every year. So none of them stand on firm ground fiscally and financially, not even Germany. Yet there is all this talk about bailing one another out and having all these arrangements. A lot of that is empty talk, but people seem to be fascinated with this, and it makes the headlines and it creates these expectations. Most of this is simply nonsense. It should be ignored. It will not solve the problem. Most of this will make things worse. And so I think that's one of the things. I think as this crisis deepens, I think people will have to reconsider the role of the state in the economy. My concern, however, is that now the public has taken on board this idea so much that in any problem you have to look to politicians and the government. That the first response will now be, as the crisis intensifies, to look for even tougher state action. I mean, I'm very concerned. I do expect things like capital controls. I do expect more interventions in the markets, in banks. More banks will be bailed out, but when they're bailed out, they will be told what to do. It's going to be very messy. But I'm still optimistic in the sense that I think ultimately people will realize that we've gone down the wrong way.
And we can relate this to, in your book, the economic paradigms, the two that you present. So there's the current one, which is interventionism and collectivism, and the laissez-faire approach. So at the moment, we're very much in the interventionism economic paradigm.
Absolutely.
And I think even the protests that we're seeing at the moment, the Occupy protests or even the riots, we're still looking to the government. All these protests are still saying, bring in the government, they should be doing more. So even those that are trying to sort of take things into their own hands, they're still not in the right paradigm to get changes happening.
It's a very interesting development, because in a way it's people don't really ask for freedom or like an anti-establishment position. It's they don't like the bankers and think they are part of the establishment, but obviously the politicians are not, or the central bankers who also or the regulators who've created all this mess. So I think there's a lot of confusion going on right now in terms of the Occupy movement and those kind of things. I mean, it will not surprise you that I'm sort of 100% capitalist. I'm a libertarian. I think as what you mentioned about the system, the two approaches, the systems we live in. I think what most people don't understand is capitalism is a tool. Right? It's a tool that allows human cooperation that is very extensive. I mean, historically, obviously, most people only cooperated and worked together in very small units and families and clans. But what we have today is we have an economy in which I can practically mix my labor with that of millions of other people. People I don't even ever meet or ever even know about in the market system, by buying and selling, and I can make use of a massive stock of capital, even capital that I don't own, but ultimately I can work with it or mix it with my labor, as I said. So we have this system of very extensive human cooperation. That's the capitalist market system, and it is that tool. And I think the question for me is, if something goes wrong there, obviously as now has happened, we do have a crisis. There are economic problems. I think the first question should be, how did the system break down?
Yeah.
What went wrong here? How could we make mistakes? And I think if you analyze it as an economist, you realize what you would have to explain is how the price signals, which are crucial in the capitalist system, got distorted. And that ultimately leads you to money as a key factor in explaining how we get into these crises. By the way, that's something that not the Austrians discovered first, but indeed the British classical economists of the 19th century did. So it's not something that is completely new.
Revolutionary.
Exactly, it's been around for a long time. But I think the approach that we see today is simply, if something goes wrong, like we have an economic problem, a recession, I feel people don't even ask the question, how did we got here? Or it's quickly blamed on something like greed or lack of regulation. Yeah. But then the question is really, the government has to fix it. So we have to stimulate it. So the economy is not a tool that allows us all to cooperate and further our material well-being. The economy is a machine that has to operate at a certain predetermined pace, and if it doesn't, the government has to step in and stimulate it and make sure it moves faster. So I think intellectually it's a very different approach about the economy, but I do think the right approach is the one to look at it as the market system, as a tool for human cooperation, and that's why we should be very careful in messing with the system and trying to cause it to behave differently by pumping money in, or by managing it. And the important thing we have to understand is, in our fiat money system, central banks will by definition always be in the situation that they have to manipulate that system, because they do have to set interest rates. They decide how much money they print. They decide how much bank reserves the banks get. These things are being set administratively with an eye to stir the economy in one or the other direction. So institutionally and systematically, we're constantly messing with this, very elaborate system that coordinates all our economic cooperation.
But even the measures which governments put into place to say our economy is healthy, you point out in the book, they're completely the wrong measures we should be looking at. For example, the price level, GDP. Maybe you'd just like to explain why we shouldn't look at the price level as a good indicator of how stable our economy is.
I think this is one of the problems about sort of economics over the last sort of 50, 60, 70 years. What we've seen is the rise of macroeconomics, where we look at macro variables. And there are various reasons for why economics has gone in this direction. I think one of the reasons is simply that it looks more scientific. It looks a little bit like natural sciences. If you collect data about the price level or GDP, econometrics, you can do nice equations with it and so forth. But what we have to understand is the driver of the economy is the individual actor. And this is something that the Austrian school has not lost sight of. Right. It's individuals trying to buy and sell and trying to improve their material position by trade and by investing and saving. So I think by moving the economic debate to these macro variables, we're losing sight of a lot of the things that go on in the economy underneath these macro variables. As to the price level, the most important thing in economics are relative prices. How one price moves relative to other things, because this determines how resources are being allocated, and this is the most important thing in an economy. It's like how you use scarce resources. How do you use them? How do you use labor? In what line of production you use things? And for that you need relative prices. Now, what I show in my book is that a system that constantly injects money into the economy must constantly distort relative prices. Yeah. And this relative price distortion must therefore then affect resource use and capital allocation. And you can show that it must over time disrupt the performance of the economy. It leads to business cycles, it leads to economic problems ultimately. But all this cannot really be observed by most macroeconomists who just look at the price level, because you can go through extended periods of time in which the overall price level looks sort of fairly well behaved. but the underlying distortions in relative prices, you cannot observe. Also, we have to say there is simply no price level that can completely capture the purchasing power of money. It's always a statistical artifact.
Yeah.
And we see this as an example. You see this very clearly in Britain, where in the years that led up to this economic crisis now, the price level was very modest and very subdued. So most people would say it's obviously a stable monetary environment. But we know that real estate prices went up very, very sharply as a result of monetary inflation. But these prices were not part of the CPI basket and not really monitored, and partially for political reasons. But you see, there is not one measure to capture changes in the purchasing power of money. And I think so the effects of money are much more complicated than simply what most mainstream macroeconomists allude to today when they point to the positive growth effect and the inflation effect of money. There are many other things going on, and it's important that we keep an eye on those.
Thank you very much for your time. It's very interesting.
Thank you.